123 countries voted yes, and 3 voted no. Today, the UN adopted a resolution declaring the transatlantic slave trade the gravest crimes against humanity and calling for reparations to the descendants of enslaved Africans and those affected by the transatlantic slave trade. That would be me. They said the gravest crimes against humanity recorded in history, and 3 countries voted no. The United States is not real, and Argentina. Now, I need you to sit with that for just a moment because those 3 countries voting no, they didn't just vote no on reparations today, okay? These are the same 3 governments currently dismantling every institution, every policy, and every framework designed to name white supremacy and address it. And that is not a coincidence. Under this administration, the United States has gutted DEI, eliminated diversity offices all across the federal government, defunded the programs tracking racial inequity, and on the UN floor today, the U.S. ambassador said the quiet part out loud, saying we do not recognize a legal right to reparation for historical wrongs that were not illegal under international law at the time. Well, let me translate that. Enslaving millions of African people, millions of human beings was not a crime then, so no debt owed, no accountability need be taken. Argentina. Javier Milei, who has already been called the Trump of South America, shut down Argentina's National Institute Against Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Racism in his first year in office. He called it a sinister body used for ideological persecution. Huh? And baby, Argentina has an extensive history of racist ideology built on the notion of European supremacy. The belief that Argentina was built by European immigrants, and they believe that Africans, Latinos, and indigenous cultural influences are irrelevant, and in fact, undesirable. So yeah, Argentina voted no, but honestly, did we expect anything else? And then we got Is Not Real, engaged in a military campaign that is right now under examination for genocide. A baby-ass country who is demanding that the entire world recognize its historical trauma while denying and refusing to recognize the historical trauma of Black people. Yuck! So 123 countries said, you know what, this happened. It was a crime. It was horrific, and a debt needs to be paid. And 3 countries said, we don't owe you shit. But those are just the 3 countries that said it out loud. Because I peeped the 52 others that didn't vote yes, so you might as well have voted no, because why not? But anyway, the resolution has been adopted, and today is a historical day. And not because of a white man who claims to be part of the Cherokee Nation being sworn in as DHS Secretary.
Oh, this wasn't on the news. To my knowledge, this was not on the news. You let me know if you saw this on the news yesterday. Okay, so yesterday, the United Nations met, and there was a vote that was taken, spearheaded by Ghana's president. And thank you, Ghana. The UN is urging reparations for slavery's historical wrongs. And they took a vote whether or not to name the transatlantic slave trade as the worst crime amongst humanity. After the vote was taken, it was huge applause. Look it up. There were 123 countries in favor of naming slavery as the worst crime amongst humanity. There were 52 countries that abstained from voting. That's, in my opinion, a no vote, because why would you abstain? There were 3 countries that said no, it wasn't. Guess who the 3 countries were? And I'll show you the vote at the end of this talk. But my point is, when you see the countries and you see how they voted, stop spending money. Stop traveling to these countries and putting money into their economy. I had to tell my cousin yesterday, him and his family, I found out, went on a vacation to Florida. And I was like, why would you go there? And he was like, I don't like their politics, but I like Florida. I said, make that make sense, because you just put money into their economy. Ghana's president, and I'm going to read, quote, started the vote by saying, today we come together in solemn solidarity to affirm truth and pursue a route to healing. And
in March 2026, the United Nations passed a resolution declaring the transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity and calling for reparations. So over 120 countries supported the cause to end slavery. But the United States voted against this, arguing that such resolution will create legal claims for reparations and apply modern law retroactive to historical events. Now, in fact, there were three nations that, there are three countries that voted against this, and that was the United States, Israel, and Argentina. Tell me, when you look at the three countries, you understand why they voted against reparations and the end of slavery, right? And one thing that is so much revealing that black people should know is that the no's that came, this comes from people that are close to black Americans or people that have lived closer to black Americans. That is the United States. The United States, majority of black Americans come from the United States. I'm not talking about black people in general. I'm talking about black Americans exclusively. They come from the United States. And then you ask yourself this question: why do you think the US came as one of the countries that voted against reparations? So this is so much revealing that the enemy is even much closer than you think, and then Israel, and then Argentina. Because for Argentina, we've been talking about anti-blackness in all these Latin-speaking countries. We have seen all these patterns, and some people we know very well that they benefited from slavery, and so black people they just want their right. They don't want anything, or at least stop slavery, but they don't want it to be stopped. So you might ask yourself this question: why is it that it is so much difficult for this group of people to accept slavery to end? Because we know that this is something which is going on until today in the 21st century. If somebody ever thought that slavery ended a long time ago, no, they might be wrong. Slavery is still going on, and it's something that was being discussed in the UN summit when 120 something countries came out to debate about this. And this was a motion that was being talked about, and it was termed as one of the gravest crimes that has ever been done in human life. But here we have the US, who strongly stood and said that no, we still stand for slavery and black people should not get reparated. So they say that for some retroactive reasons that they had in regards to this. So brothers and sisters, I want us to watch this video because we have black people that are speaking about this, and I think it's important for us to get to hear their opinion in regards to this. And then I'm gonna be back. I'll be giving my 2 cents in regards to this. And if you're watching me for the first time, I'm asking you to please subscribe to the channel, join the membership. I really get what I can offer you. But until then, let me see you at the end of this all, while I'll be giving my commentaries in regards to this.
Reparative justice. That's an important statement right there, because for those white people who wonder why we can't move on, because it wasn't acknowledged properly, the accountability was not taken properly. He goes on to say, for more than 400 years, millions of people were stolen from Africa, put in shackles, and shipped to the New World to toil in cotton fields and sugar and coffee plantations under scorching heat and the crack of a whip. Now, I'm not going to compare one tragedy amongst an ethnicity against the other. I'm not downplaying the Holocaust. I'm not downplaying the land stolen from Native Americans, because they all have a bad stain on history. Getting back to the 3 that said no, which ones do you think? Israel, Argentina, and the United States. No surprise there. Let me read what the representative from the United States said. Dan Negria said, and I quote, "The text was highly problematic in countless respects. He regretted that Washington must once again remind this body that the United Nations exists to maintain international peace and security, and was not founded to advance narrow specific interests and agendas, to establish niche international days, nor to create new costly meeting and reporting mandates." The hypocrisy is unreal. He went on to say, furthermore, the U.S. does not recognize a legal right to reparations for historical wrongs that were not illegal under international law at the time they occurred. Everyone has gotten a bit of justice other than African Americans. And I'm not saying that that justice makes up for things, but the Jewish people got reparations for the Holocaust. Native Americans can attend universities and schools free, and they get some other monetary things. I'm not saying that suffices. African Americans has got nothing but continuous racism. Even the UN secretary, and I quote, said, "Now we must remove the persistent barriers that prevent so many people of African descent from exercising their right and realizing their potential." He went on to urge countries to drive action to eradicate systematic racism. So while other countries will be working to eradicate, what's the United States doing? Well, we see what they're doing. And I want other ethnicities to think about this. The countries where enslaved Africans were taken from also suffered a hollowing out, lost generations who potentially could have helped that country to prosper. This is why so much of there is a breakdown in our family structure. Here's how the countries voted. Don't spend your tax dollars in these countries.
We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of the draft resolution A/80/L48, please signify. Those against and those in abstention.
The Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/A/L48 entitled Declaration of the Trafficking of Enslaved Africans and Racialized Chattel Enslavement of Africans as the greatest crime against humanity. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
That's all the politics I have for you this Thursday morning. Y'all have a great day.
If ever you wanted to find out whether there are peoples or countries allied with Black Americans and, candidly, the entire African diaspora, you need no further look at this vote. You see, the United Nations made a decision, and it was rightfully done by Ghana. Ghana's president proposed a resolution that would condemn the most horrific form of inhumanity possible, and that is slavery. And this is what he had to say.
On this beautiful day in March, we're called to stand on the right side of history. Let it be recorded that when history beckoned, we did what was right for the memory of the millions who suffered the indignity of the slave trade and those who continue to suffer racial discrimination. Let our vote on this resolution restore their dignity and humanity.
In favor, 123, against 3, abstentions 52. Therefore, draft resolution A/80/L48 is adopted.
So while the resolution passed, and I'm happy that it did, I would like you to pay attention to 3 specific things. Number one, let's look at the countries that voted for the resolution. Let's look at the countries that voted against the resolution. 3 countries in particular: Argentina, the United States, and Israel. And then over 50 countries that abstained from voting for this resolution. Now, what's interesting is that we're going to war with Iran, but Iran voted for the resolution. And other countries who are supposedly our enemies, they voted for the resolution. The 3 countries that voted against the resolution, Argentina, I don't give a fuck about what they are and who they are. They will never get my support, and candidly, they have demonstrated their racism. The United States obvious. But Israel? Also, pay attention to the more than 50 countries that abstain. These are countries that want our allyship. So this vote does two things for me. It provides a clear record of who our friends are and who our enemies are. And honestly, it does a third thing. It shows who is lukewarm, who really don't care about us. And this is a clear indication to me of who, going forward, I'm going to work with, who I'm going to advocate for, and who cannot, gaslight me anymore.
The great urban poet, well, at least that version of him, Kanye West, once said, racism is still alive, they just be concealing it. And this is a perfect example to be able to spot racism concealed, right? The UN votes to recognize slavery as gravest crime against humanity. Now, I'm going to get to the votes by countries in a second, but when I say racism being concealed, it's just watch the reaction of certain groups of people and how they react to the acknowledgement of the plight of Black people, right? And really, the reason why I say that it's racism concealed is really just, at the end of the day, subconsciously, you approve of the dehumanization of Black people. Okay, because when you say the excuses and make up the things that you make up, and you want to divert and deflect into, didn't Africans have slaves as well? Obviously, just say you don't understand the history of how you see Africa today versus what it was, tribes versus other tribes. You don't understand the history of servitude. You don't understand the history of chattel slavery as we see it. But at the end of the day, even with the UN saying this, there's information that shows us that whatever you had thought of chattel slavery and its effect, it was most likely worse than you thought it was, right? When you see the descendants of enslaved people here and what they went through after, and the enslaved people then, when you think about what it did to the continent of Africa as a whole, and you also think about just the effects after on the continent of Africa as it relates to colonialism, you should be able to piece together this was some grave, nasty shit, right? But okay, let's get into the article. And if you're wondering, usual suspects, the U.S. voted no on this. Israel voted no on this. Argentina voted no on this. We'll get to the U.S.'s reasoning. I live in the U.S., so I'm just going to talk about the U.S. in a second. And we had 52 countries abstained. Ironically, countries that may have also benefited from slavery, maybe not to the extent of the United States, the UK and European Union member states. I want to point out that till today, only I believe the Netherlands has ever, as far as European countries are concerned, have apologized for their role in chattel slavery, now, or transatlantic slave trade, or whatever you want to call it. But anyway, now I do want to move to the United States. Now, the three countries that I did mention, a lot of y'all are connecting dots. This one of those things where it's like, let's keep it in house, folks. Let's keep it in house. But anyway, the U.S. objected to the cynical usage of historical wrongs as a leverage point. It's to reallocate modern resources to people and nations. They're going to dress it up real well. But let me just tell you something about the U.S. and as far as its acknowledgement of slavery. I believe Barack Obama was the only U.S. president, first U.S. president to do that, to ironically first Black president or biracial president, whatever you want to call him. But the United States has never, in my opinion, and my readings, faced the issue of slavery head on. Okay. So when you say really things like, and when I say head on, I mean at the minute slavery was outlawed in these United States of America, there should have been, similar to denazification in Germany, there should have been an immediate, and this is where the Reconstruction era and stuff like that comes in, there should have been an immediate attack on that line of thinking, right? Like, wow, we dehumanize a group of people. How do we help them become not only, equal members of society? And obviously I'm asking for a lot here. You're asking for a bunch of people who saw a group of other people as less than human to immediately flip a switch, right? But because they didn't do that,
Well, okay, no, I don't want to get because I don't want to make this too long because they didn't tackle this then, in my opinion, head on. It allowed for this monkey that stays on your back. It's just going to keep lingering. So you have to be able, you have to now sit in front of the UN and say things like, "Oh, we don't want to." Actually, let me just read it to you. It's saying things like, you don't want today's states and institutions to be held responsible for historical wrongs. So you never addressed it in the past. So you know what I'm saying? You never, there were never reparations for it in the past. And then also, I was listening on the U.S. delegate, and another thing that was mentioned was, oh, we shouldn't, we should be careful about trying to pay for something that was seen as illegal during that time. I'm paraphrasing. And again, we're setting new standards for Black folks. There are a number of things in this world that we looked at and was like, oh, it was illegal back then, but we realized it was grave. It was just terrible, and it was inhumane, right? I don't want to get into the oppression Olympics, but we've got a number of them. And in fact, we have a number of them that the U.S. Had looked into itself, okay, and was like, hey, oh man, we shouldn't have did that. Here's an apology. Here's some kind of compensation for that. Now, this was presented by Ghana, and I don't get into the self-hating Black folks. You know who you are. Y'all don't get no airtime around here. But I do think there were some interesting conversations that people had brought up as far as African countries, West African countries particularly as a whole, and where they want to go with this, and how it relates to whether, the accountability they want to give to Western powers, the accountability, how they want to hold Western powers accountable, and who benefits, and et cetera. I think those things are really decent conversations if these Western powers were even going to, because I believe this is a General Assembly resolution, so it doesn't really hold as much weight. That's the best way I can say it. But I think there's a conversation to be had if these countries were willing to take responsibility. Like if the United States wanted to take responsibility and prioritize the descendants of Black American enslaved people here first, deal with your shit in house. Then you have the UK and European countries and how it relates to West Africa. Like that would be a conversation, right? But we got to get through step one first, which is just at least admitting it was a grave mistake. Oh, one more thing. As far as the other two countries outside of the United States, how they voted, which is by voting with the United States, I can only assume some of it might be a little bit of oppression Olympics at play there, and also just simply because conjoined at the hip with the United States, right? You see that U.S. and Israel, they tend to vote on UN issues. They tend to be aligned. The Argentinians, I guess, because their government currently, I don't know why you can't just abstain to save face, Israel and Argentina. Their government obviously chummies up with the United States and the Trump administration. So I think some of it is oppression Olympics. I fear I want to ask, like, hey, do you think this might undermine the history of your people recently and what they went through? That's a conversation I would really like to have, because slavery was centuries.
Like,
So one of the biggest questions that I was trying to seek an answer was why the U.S. has historically struggled to fully let go of slavery's legacy, even long after abolition. The following are the reasons that I found out why it's so much hard for the United States to fully let go of slavery. First, that I found was slavery was deeply embedded in the foundation of the U.S. economy. This is something that all of us know. First, slavery in the United States wasn't just a social system. It was an economic engine. For over 200 years, people who went through slavery generated enormous wealth through agriculture. I'm talking about enslaved Africans. We talk about cotton, we talk about tobacco, we talk about sugar, which helped build the early American economy. And even after the abolition in 1865, the wealth created by slavery did not disappear. It was transferred into institutions, land ownership, banks, and industries. Because of this, fully acknowledging slavery was a crime tied to reparation it raises uncomfortable questions about who benefited and who should be accountable today. And that's why you saw the United States saying no to reparations and saying yes to slavery. Because somehow they will be liable, and they don't want to be liable. They don't want to take accountability. They don't want to show that they are responsible for the things that they did historically. So I really want to know, because we found the first reason is that it helped the United States economically, but the United States is not ready to indemnify or to pay black people for the damages that are being caused historically, because this one was embedded in the foundation of the United States. So the second reason is abolition did not dismantle the system, it transformed it. So let's talk about it. When slavery was abolished after the Civil War, systems like sharecropping, segregation, that's what we call Jim Crow right now, and mass incarceration emerged. So this system maintained racial inequality in different forms. So while slavery as a legal institution ended, its social and economic structure evolved rather than disappeared. So this makes it harder for the US to let go, because the consequences are still visible in wealth gaps, education, and policing. And this all changed how we perceive all these groups of people, because when slavery evolved, it brought new problems. The United States ended slavery, yes, but it did not end. It did not go, because understand that this was embedded. This was embedded in the America's foundation. And so it was so much difficult for them to let go. So what do? They didn't accept 100% transition or 100% change. What they did, they decided to transform it to be seen in other forms. So really, you want to know what's really going on. Yeah. So, that was also another reason. The third reason is national identity and historical narrative play a big role. Yes, I understand that many countries struggle with acknowledging painful histories, but in the US, slavery directly contradicts the national ideals of freedom and democracy, and so fully accepting the scale of slavery's brutality and its lasting impact forces a re-examination of national identity. That's why debates over how slavery is taught in schools or discussed publicly are often intense. And so, accepting reparations can feel politically like admitting that the nation's foundation included emergent injustices that still requires repair. You see, the United States presents itself as one of the perfect countries we have ever had, because to them, they are translating this that acknowledging or accepting to reparate black people is like accepting mistake, and this is a problem to the image of the United States. So they won't let that happen, because to them, it will be like admitting they caused the problem, and that will interfere with their image. Somebody also said that the fourth reason is fear of financial and legal consequences, and that's reparation, right? One of the biggest reasons behind resistance, especially in international forums, is the fear of reparations. If slavery is formally recognized globally as a crime requiring compensation, it could lead to massive financial claims. The US explicitly stated it does not recognize as a legal right to reparation for actions that were not illegal under international law at that time. So this is less about denying history and more about avoiding legal and economic liability. They don't want just to pay, because there will be a lot of lawsuits that will be coming after that. The fifth reason is political divisions inside the US. I'ma explain. So, reparations and historical accountability are highly divisive topics within American politics. Some policymakers support studying or implementing reparations. So there are approach. There are even proposals in Congress, while others strongly oppose them. So because of this internal division, the US often takes caution or resistant positions intentionally to avoid committing to something that is not agreed upon domestically. The seventh reason is concern about setting a precedent globally. So if the US supports reparations for slavery, it could open doors for other historical claims worldwide. Colonialism, wars, displacements of indigenous people, many Western countries, not just in the US, right, are wary of this. That's why even countries that didn't vote against the revolution often abstained. They are concerned about the broad implication of such a precedent. The seventh reason is geopolitical strategy versus moral positioning. At the UN, countries don't vote based on morality. They also think strategically. The US often evaluates resolutions based on how they affect its global position, alliances, and legal exposure. So even if many Americans acknowledge slavery as a grave injustice, the government may still oppose certain resolutions because of how they are framed or what they could lead to political and legally. And the last and the eighth reason is the legacy of slavery is still unresolved, not forgotten. So the key point here is the US has not failed to let go of slavery simply because it doesn't care. It's because of the consequences of slavery are still present and are still unresolved. So issues like racial inequality, wealth gaps, and systemic discrimination are directly tied to that history. So until those are addressed in a meaningful way, debates about reparations, recognitions, or accountability will continue. So both in the US and at the global stage. Please, really, let me know what you think about this. And as you know, I'm your host and presenter Generic Stories. But until then, let me see you in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute.